This presentation will be a series of short presentations by various Larp and game designers who will tell us about specific who will tell us about specific games and how they have made conscious design choices regarding the geography of the game location, how to use a specific location that places the specific demands on the game, and how they've shaped the scenography to accommodate or to strengthen a specific type of playing. So it will be really hands-on and specific. The theme is, we call this spatial design because we lack a better word for it. It's nothing new. We haven't invented a new word. It's because we have probably all experienced that the physical realities of the game affects the way we play. So if it's from the costumes to the scenography. The costumes affect how we play. That's why the knight in full armor can't catch the thief, but the guardsman can. Which means that if you're doing a game where the occupiers of the fantasy village are knights in full armor, then they won't be able to catch the resistance. Well, against if you make sure that they have a less armored counterpart, they might be. Rain changes quite a lot how any game is played, because it immediately and specifically affects where we are able to play and what we're comfortable playing. And I know that the topic of controlling player movement will be one of the topics that one of the talkers will talk about. Jonas Trier will talk a bit about how he wants to design a grill, and a game called the Whiteboard. Pallet will talk about how scenography and how the scenography changed between different runs of a game called Marcello's Killer. Actually changed how the players played the game. Cecilia Dodd will talk a bit about how you tweak an existing location to make it suit your purposes. Carolina Derby will talk about a game called The Secret, where they control the player movement by various effects such as sound. Christopher Tuer will talk about a game called The which was heavily black-box influenced, and they control and they staged the scenes by using lighting and sound. There's no oh God, I don't really need that perspective. No. Mostly, and this is a bit of a straw man, because everybody who stages a game anywhere makes some conscious choices about how to stage the game, how to use the location. Very often, those choices are influenced by the urge to simulate a specific place. We want to build a spaceship. We want to make this look as a medieval village. And thereby we that's my slides. Many times our design choices are influenced by our aesthetics instead of the other way around, which is why Jonas and I had the discussion about this program item and why we wanted to do it, because it would be nice to become a little bit better at using a scenography, because it does matter a lot. And it would be awesome if we could get some lessons from some people who have actually actively used it. So, I think I won't ask Jonas to start. Yeah,
You can, if you would.
Okay, yeah, then I would like to start.
Great. You have my slides. So we will have to find those.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you are. Good morning. So yes, as was said, I'm going to talk about whiteboard and a grill bar, and that is why these slides are the titles Fried Iguana and Unveiling Sucks. The first case would be City of Cities, which was a post-apocalyptic Larp held in Denmark with some 200 participants, very gung-ho, straightforward game where we wanted to create a food stand. I think my bullets are of higher importance, so we'll put those there. Okay. The challenges were not formalized before we started working with this, but it's sort of in retrospect is argued you can fix it somehow soon in or out. It would be wonderful, but it's not a necessity. We wanted to create a food stand that facilitates social interaction, and the analog solution rocks. Very weird. Okay, a food stand that would facilitate social interaction. Usually working on a food stand at a Larp is not very interesting because you're basically just working on a costume. At least this was what we thought, and this was what we wanted to do or to get away from. So, our solution, I can probably use the whiteboard as well. We took some inspiration from Asian night markets that you will find in Hong Kong and Singapore and all over China, as far as I know, but at the very least in Singapore and Hong Kong, and applied some very simple principles to this place. This is sort of a rough sketch from the side. It's a bit matted out. These are the guys working, and these are the customers. The point is that instead of placing your average large kitchen out here, desk here, and then you have an inn with a lot of small tables, we gathered everything in one. So that you had a center aisle with the stoves, then you had a walking area on each side of the aisle with a working desk and a serving desk, and then some benches for people to sit on. Does this make sense? As seen from above? Okay. The point is, and this was all neatly wrapped in a large tent, which was very dark out here. And we put a lot of light in here. This was 80s bonanza, so it was light in different colors, etc. You can see it's the same basic thing I drew over here. What this did was, first of all, the staff was elevated. They were about half a foot higher than the rest of us, so like old apothecaries. Like you had a dominant position, you were more visible than the people coming into your shop. This goes to show that we tried to shift the focus from the customer to the cook, so that the cook would be the interesting thing. The most important thing about this very, very simple construction is that we try to control the line of sight from the customer. The problem with this model, why it doesn't facilitate interaction, is that the customers will only bounce off your serving desk, and then they will sit around tables and they will look at each other, which is perfectly fine because that's what tables afford. They afford sitting around them and looking at each other. Wonderful place for interaction, but our field of interest was how do we make the game interesting for this guy or girl up in the kitchen. Here, when people sat down, their line of sights would, they had to go out of their place to speak to the player next to them, but it was very, very easy for them to interact with the cook while he or she was serving their food. And the ones working the stoves, usually these were also the people serving, but if they weren't, they were placed dead center. So it's a very, very easy point for them to just put down the skillets and interact a bit with some people because they were elevated, they were in the center. So that was our second principle. We wanted to control line of sight. Now speaking of affordances, which, and Ari can correct me if I'm wrong here, which is a design term for the implied actions that a certain space or object has, a door affords to be opened, etc. Does it make sense? Okay. Controlling darkness and light worked brilliantly as well in our experience. This zone, very, very light. Out near the edges, it was very dark. We had not all prioritized. We hadn't put any cool objects out there, no tables, no lights, no nothing. It was a very, very, very uninteresting zone to be in. So, what happened, people entered from the sides, is that we saw the streams of customers flooding in, everyone turning in, sort of piling in around here. It's a very, very, very simple trick. It is in no way rocket science, but with these small things, we believe that you can actually, I think there's, yeah. Here you can see the counters from the other side. On my first slide, does it go back as well? Yes. This will be the guy serving. You can just see the edge of the cooking area and how it would look when people came in. So, simple tricks that for us really, really worked. Good. Second example, the whiteboard. This was a part of a lot. This was just me. This is a lot I actually organized as well. In very short terms, the whiteboard was an analogy to the art of war with two cultures. So participants in two cultures called the Tars and Pashura. The Pashura, a local collectivist, open, very physical and loud people, and the Tars being some sort of a paraphrase over Western martial culture. Distance was prioritized, and there were soldiers, and they were occupying the Pashura's country. When designing the camp that these Pashura, these locals, who I should say were not modeled over Iraqi people or Iraqi culture, they were just modeled as the opposite of Western martial culture. We wanted to create an environment that expressed the Pashura culture while being both hostile to the Tars, to the occupying forces, and friendly to the Pashura. So we tried to work with some sort of cultural coding of the space. Alright. And we did a couple of things. Again, we worked with line of sights. The camp was more or less circular, and all the Pashura families had different areas in here. However, it was divided by quite thin cloth walls that didn't cover everything. So your line of sight from, say, a random point A to a random point B would be broken, but you could very much hear what happened. I'll return to this later. So this was very much one big tent where the collectivist culture could be together and was very much together while still maintaining some sort of privacy in their own cloth walls, small spaces. The sound is diffuse sounds, because the good thing is that while you couldn't see from A to B, you could very clearly hear from A to wherever. Now with a very loud culture and occupying forces, this makes, in my opinion, for a good design. Because the aim was very much to stress the soldiers when they were out doing routine checks, for instance. With a very loud culture, how many were in 40 Pashura? 50 Pashura? 50 to 60. All speaking very loud noises around them in this tent where they couldn't see them, never maintaining a controlling line of sight as any soldier would. We create this, or we let the game basically create the chaotic atmosphere without adding any design elements other than the spatial one. Then another thing, the Pashura had small pallet beds. They were no higher than, say, this. They were, however, all dressed in very loose gowns, jalabas, these kind of things. The soldiers, on the other hand, were strapped in tight in a sort of frack vest, high boots, leather straps, etc. So, as you probably know if you ever played a soldier, famous Larp, it is absolutely horrible to get down and sit properly. Again, this is a very, very, very simple thing. For the Pashura, this was easy. Loose gowns, not a problem. But if a soldier wanted to sit down comfortably and try to peacefully interact with the local, they had to go out of the way. again, it's a question of affordances. It's a question of what can you do, realistically do within the space, and we just made it very, very troublesome for the soldiers to interact with the locals, both on a personal level or on a person-to-person level, but also with the design. Good, that's my bets and sealing. The general, I know I'm working over this quite quickly, but there are a lot of us who have a lot to say. My one take-home message would be that solutions are often quite simple. Just simulating the very simple concept of line of sight. Where do my players look? If Josephine and I, we're somehow within a meter of one another and would naturally look at each other, I believe there is a higher chance for us to interact as role players than if the room affords me standing like this. It's very simple. So if you in any way can design a room that facilitates that, I think you will be able to improve your game. And I believe that this whole field of spatial design will, I think there are a lot of undiscovered tools that we as game designers can use, because I believe that designing or reading a space, be it light or sound or some of the small ninja tricks that we use, can be as powerful as the game mechanics that we spend a lot of time discussing. Thank you. Should we take questions afterwards? I will discuss after.
Okay, how many of you know about Celestra here? How many were there? Oh, some of you. So, to work with a location that looks like this, it gives you, in the beginning, limitations. It's not easy just to go on a place and know that I will try to transform this to a spaceship. So, because what we wanted to do at Celestra, we wanted to have the feeling that you can make your own way through space. And we also had this brand that everyone knew about. Everyone know how the costumes look. So we decided in the beginning that we wanted to provide the costumes. And that was a good choice in some way, but was a hazard for me as an organizer, because I don't see myself as a game designer. I'm a game producer, so I'm always standing in the bridge between the practical stuff and the designer. And that's not easy when you have a designer say, I want to do this thing, I want people to be able to sleep at Celestra, and the producer stuff like, fire security, fire regulation, it's a bit hard. So, to try to make your own way through space, and in an environment that's really closed down, you need to work with other things. So what we decided really soon is that we wanted to work with sounds, we wanted to work with different kind of stations, and we wanted to work with different kind of lights. So at Jonas Småland, the light was yellow. And what do you think about as a spaceship? What is your first think of color when you think that you should enter a spaceship? Red. Red?
Blue.
Green. Green. If you look at the TV show, it's mostly green. Some of the places are red. And if they are only red when Caprica 6 is entering the room, either later in the episode or if she's doing that in that scene. And we studied that a lot and looked at lightning. So we decided to make it a slightly blue and slightly green in different primaries. So that people, when they are entering the Jonas Småland, you should feel like, okay, this is a different kind of environment. Because when you're going outside, you see the sun, you see a sunny Gothenburg. So that's why we decided to work a lot with the lights. And what we also decided to do that in the middle of the ship, we had this station where you can actually divide the ship into two parts. We have the radio station there, and if you control that, or you try to damage that, there will also sound starting, that is the radio alarm, and also the light was shifting. So that were the two things that we were actually working on, and it was a pretty hard thing to do, because there were also a museum, so we always had this kind of things that we need to look for first. Like, can we do this? Are we allowed to do this? And what can we give the players to play with? So we were trying to give this toolbox so people can feel safe in the toolbox of the game, so they can play from that toolbox. One of the things we also looked at was the thing that play to loops. We wanted people to feel safe and to know what they were expecting. Because we were making this game in 4 episodes, And that was for the first time when we looked at it, it was for the safety reasons. Because at a location like that, we only were allowed to have 150 people on the ship at each time. So that's why we decided to make it a 4-episode game, because we needed to take people off and change a lot of stuff behind the scenes for the next episodes. So what we did, we created a gunfighting rule that was really easy to see. Like if you put up a fist and want to fight with someone, then someone comes in with a gun. Then the gun goes over the fist. Then if someone comes in with 2 guns, then that's that person that owns the scene. And if someone comes in with the biggest gun, that's that person that owns the scene. So we're trying to engage people to have this easy rules so they can just play inside in this steel environment that was not really a safe place to be. To go in a location that's mostly made of steel, we were thinking, okay, what kind of accidents can happen? How can we use the game design to have it more safe? And we had 3 injuries during the game, and nothing of them were actually in-game. It was when people were walking outside and inside the boat. And also what we did for the security reasons, we did a security movie, and that actually impacted people's gameplay. We realized afterwards, because people were seeing me and my friend Sebastian standing there in costume, so they actually remembered us as in-game characters. So as soon as we tried to explain in-game things as an off-game, from the off-game side, we were using the costumes so people were feeling that there was something from the TV show. Because when you have an IP or a brand that has such limits, if you look at the Lord of the Rings, and you want to make a game from that environment, you have a lot of costumes. If you look at Battlestar Galactica, you just have this kind of costumes. Because everyone knows how a person from Galactica looks. Everyone sort of knows how a person from Caprica looks. So you have different kinds of game sets. And also, one of the hardest things for us was to talk about the information. How can we make an easy way for everyone at the ship to have information of what's going on? So we made different kinds of sounds that when a torpedo was firing off, that walked all through the ship. So we had 15 different sound consoles that was connected to the network. So we can play a sound when something happens on that side of the boat, so people over there can realize that. Because normally in a small location, it takes like 2 minutes to walk from that side to that side. In-game, it took at least 10 minutes to walk from the other side of the boat, because there were always people standing everywhere. And that also created a feeling that you can't speak alone, that someone can always overhear you. And that was also a good thing for the game design, because we didn't want the information to stop at sort of the Galactica crew or someone else from the Celestial crew that wanted to that had a high position. One of the other things that we did, we put in a telephone system, because we wanted to use sound again, and we have please press monitor and stand by. Please press monitor and stand by. So we could have public announcements all the time. And that was also one thing that people used. We used it for in-game reasons, and we also did use that for off-game reasons. Then it was easy for someone to call from the other side of the boat to the next side and just see, also, are you in control of this station? Okay, good. Then we could jump from here to here, because all these different kind of consoles that we had, you need to be in control at least 2 or 3 of them, depending on what you want to do in the game. So, because we placed this all out during the game, and did the different kinds of things you could do, we were just trying to make people interact with each other. And okay, we have this console, we need to have someone else standing here. Okay, you're a civilian, come over here, you just use this thing, and then I can go over to the next console and see if that works. Because sometimes the telephone system didn't work as an in-game reason, and sometimes it didn't work as an off-game thing also. Because it was not easy to have 2 kilometers of network cable and in a hard steel boat. So the hard thing with a small location is that it's always information. So it was not an easy thing to provide, and that's what we also had used the episode things, so that people could talk to each other during the episodes and give the information. Have you heard this rumor? Okay, can we play this in the next scene? And because of the episode, we were really clear about if in the first episode we want you to have this, in the second episode this can happen to the character, in the third episode you can be injured, and in the fourth episode you can actually die. Because we're really open with this, people already know what they are supposed to expect from other players to interact, and they know how hard they can interact also with others. So my tip for this is have easy rules so everyone can follow, and just try to give people a toolbox of funny things to do in space. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm now going to switch pictures. Let's see if we do have pictures or found. Is it possible I need to... How is this on Macintosh again? I just want to copy this picture to the screen.
Is there a shortcut for it?
Probably, but it's been a while since we used this on presentations. Usually it's just automatic. Okay, this is an excellent time for the computer to freeze up.
Yes, yes indeed.
Okay, as the computer figures itself out, I will try to begin talking. I'm going to talk a bit about Larp and Pallet. I'm reusing some slides, I hope, that I had from the presentation I did about this Larp and Pallet. For that presentation, something like 5 people turned up. So I keep reusing those slides, and every occasion I can. Here are like 3 times as many people. Because the pictures are awesome. And if you have not seen them, then let's see, the computer might be working. And I hope you will have a chance to see them right now.
Otherwise, you're going to need to use the slides next time.
If there is a next time. Okay, I officially give up. I will
do this.
Something happened. Hey! Hooray! This was a Larp that was based entirely on song lyrics. So the Larp design was an interpretation of lyrics from the album Til du dør by Kaiser's Orchestra, which is a band that's very famous if you're Norwegian Danish, and very weird and unknown if you're not. We designed the Larp partially to try to attract new players, and it succeeded as such. It is currently, I think, Norway's most played Larp. It's been replayed 7 times. Each run is quite small. The lyrics say there is a stairway down to cellars and no one must walk sideways. On the wall are lots of pictures of people who have gone down and will never seen again. My cellar is no ordinary cellar. There's been 100 men down there at once. and in its midst, there's a table, and on that table there is a revolver, and the revolver spells made in Hong Kong. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. We play Russian roulette each Friday, and on Sunday there will be a confirmation. Mrs. Conradas has made it clear Sunday at noon we will not see a drop of blood. But Marcelo is cute when he drinks. This is his wine, his women, and his dance. He is a charmeur like none other. Everything and everyone here are his. Hallelujah, etc., etc., etc. And to make it all even more Russian, they've gotten hold of a Russian ballerina. She dances polka in the traditional way, earning 100 for her silence until next Friday. The mood in Marcel's cellar is without comparison. They're good and sweaty when you leave. And those who can't stand their distance, they can't be a member of the resistance. So it's a musical Larp. And my role in this Larp was as lead designer, having lots and lots of help. I think 15 people were involved in production. And the spatial design I actually outsourced to the two other main organizers, Alan Monsen and Albert 12. The reason I'm here to talk about the spatial design and not them at the moment is because I was the guy who noticed what happened when they weren't around to take care of the spatial design, which is when you have a rerunnable Larp, you have new locations and so on, and things keep on changing. And that part is the interesting part. Now, to make Marcelo's cello real, we needed 3 different centerpieces, borrowing from Troels said. 3 different hearts of attention at different times of the game. One was we wanted there to be dancing, because that's what you do when you're in Marcelo's basement. You dance, and you might play games of poker and other simple things, but our fallback solution was people can always dance. So we needed some kind of dance floor, and we also needed people to reduce performance anxiety, which was done by a very simple dance workshop and the rule that if you dance as good as me, then it's okay. I'm a horrible dancer, so that worked quite well. We needed a stage, because every 20 minutes the Larp transited to musical time. We played one of the songs from the album. The characters who were mentioned in that song, because as most of the characters were based on names mentioned in the songs, had to go up on the stage and perform the song, sing along and act out the stuff they were singing about. And then in addition, a repeating theme in the songs is that in Marcelo's cellar people are playing Russian roulette. And so we want the Russian roulette to be a big part of this game. We needed a table where people would sit down, spin the gun, and shoot each other, and they would need various reasons to do so. So that gave us 3 different center stages of the game. Now this was a Larp, so we really didn't want to put people up on the stage. That would increase performance anxiety, and it wouldn't feel very Larpy. So this is the basic stage of the first run of Marcelo's cello. We have these are 4 columns that kind of define the center, so you also have a periphery of the room. So we have various seats and people could play with poker and card games and so on. They can sit and drink all around this area. There's a huge bar over there. But then inside here we define the central area. We let the roulette table occupy roughly half of it, a bit to the side. But then when the lights went on, the roulette table became the center of attention in the room. And then we had a different set of lights that when we entered musical time would enlighten the stage area, which was just a bit of the floor. And then we would have people moving in here to what is marked as the dance area to sing along and create good atmosphere while people were performing in the stage area. So it would be quite intimate. Like we had basically all the players inside the square during the musical performances, and that reduced also performance anxiety for the people performing, because all their friends were around singing along, dancing clumsily, and it was all good fun. For the first round of Marcelo's cello, this worked very, very well. It worked exactly as planned. Then at the second round of Marcelo's cello, now we had to deal with the sound and lights without the help of Alan and Albert. So they wrote down instructions and passed along to other people who then did their best to imitate it. But we noticed that there was a lot less oompa. And by oompa we meant people kind of hanging around really, rocking it and dancing and so on. Instead of hanging out in here, being close to the people on the stage, the crowd was kind of more out here by the columns and a bit withdrawn. Also increasing performance anxiety in there. It wasn't too bad. I mean, people still enjoyed the Larp, but we felt that, oh, well, the first one was better. Why was that? one reason, of course, was it was a rerun. The first run, it wasn't clear this was a rerunnable Larp, and so everybody was like, okay, let's make this work. You know, Kaiser's Larp, this is going to be cool. Let's try how to make this work. Well, the second one, it was like, okay, we're going to play at this awesome Larp. So there was a bit of performance anxiety introduced just that way. But also, for the second round, there was one set of lights for the stage and dance area, or like the musical time lights were much broader. So you had this large, brightly lit area. And that actually affected play a lot, because that's my hypothesis is that's why people were scared out of this area by the bright lights, because when you're just going to rock along, you don't really want to be in spotlight. Spotlight becomes bigger, people become more reserved, and performance anxiety increases for people in the center. So there's just this tiny alteration of lights actually influenced a lot immensely. Then we can fast forward a few runs. The fifth run of Marcellus Cello was played in Bergen, and the fifth run had a mortality rate of characters that was about 3 times higher than any other run of Marcellus Cello. I think more than half of the lot died towards the end. And it was really quite absurd because people were dancing happily and merrily on the dance floor and at the roulette table. The magazine was spun, people shot themselves, bodies were carried out, and the dancing continued. Now, the problem is when you get to a certain mortality rate, the Larp kind of loses this feeling of reality. It becomes a bit immaterial. And when, towards the end of the Bergen run, Mr. Kaiser, who is kind of the hero of the lyrics, died, and people just kept on dancing and felt, okay, this could be better. But why? What was so different about the Bergen run? But one thing is, I suspect the Bergen Larpers, are there any Bergen Larpers here? Not good. The Bergen Larpers seem to be a bit more trigger happy. Because at this particular run of Marcellus Cello, we actually had to confiscate firearms that people had brought along to the game. This is not an issue that this has not been an issue at any of the other runs of Marcellus Cello. But still, that was only like a subset of the participants, there was a newbie Larpers and so on, they're otherwise quite similar. So I don't think the trigger happiness alone explains the high mortality rates. No, I think the space explains it. Because this is the basic setup of the Bergen run. They had more seats in this area. It was an awesome location, by the way, like this big old brick building and professional sound technicians and light technicians and so on. Totally awesome. But they had said, okay, dancing is important in this Larp, so they had this dance area that was quite huge. They had a very large roulette table. This sketch does not do it justice, but it was to the side of things. The thing is that at the previous runs, once somebody sat down at the roulette table, which was in the center of the room, and we lit that area, it commanded the attention of the entire room. It was dark around here, it was bright here, and so even if you were sitting here, your attention goes this way, and you're naturally attracted to that. But in the Bergen run, even if we light up this area and dim all the other lights, that is still kind of, it doesn't attract that much attention, you can't really form that much of a crowd around the roulette table. And you would think this would lead to less Russian roulette. No, it led to the opposite, because it reduced the cost of playing Russian roulette. So whenever you were slightly bored, you could always run over and sit down and spin the magazine and play around the Russian roulette. But then, of course, people kept on dancing. So that was basically it. My lessons in spatial design from Marcellus Cello. And the bottom line one is trust your spatial designer and make sure that their word is law when the Larp is rerun.
Sorry, it's a bit awkward and switching computers all the time. We'll get through it, I think.
So much.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is a Larp that is, I think at least internationally, maybe unknown. In Sweden, it's something. The people who were there knew about it. And that has its various reasons why it ended up that way. But I was very happy to have a reason to actually dig up the old documentation and actually talk about that game design today. So this is a game that was called Hemligheten in Scandinavian, or
if I would translate, it would be The Secret. It was run in Sweden in 2009. And I want to begin with giving credits that it was me and the other main organizers, Carl Ytterberg, who designed and produced this game. And I will show photos in this presentation, which was taken by Jonas and Jonas. And the setting of this, oh yeah, also there's a spoiler warning for the movie The Village. Has everyone seen it? Okay, so if anyone, I will tell you if there's a spoiler and you can just come. So the setting of the film was an isolated village in the middle of a big forest. And the inhabitants were huddling within a ring of fire, of torches, which was their first and most important line of defense against a malevolent darkness in the forest. The setting and the play style and the sort of layout of the individual characters was very heavily inspired by the movie The Village. The entire storyline was not ripped off the movie The Village, but we used it as a sort of a cultural interaction documentation for the participants. And that's why it becomes a spoiler. So, the style of the game, we wanted a game that was high, and the reason why I'm telling you this is because otherwise it will not make sense when I tell you why we made the design choices that we did. It was a high resolution game. It was fairly transparent in its design, which means that we had very few secrets off-game. We wanted a very strong dramatic focus and a focus on storytelling with intense, high-resolution scenes between the participants. And the entire setting, the village, the clothes, the special effects, everything was 360, so it was very much as what you see is what you get, Larp. There were some exceptions, like we had a meta house and a meta tent where you could play scenes outside of the 360 context, but largely it was a complete 360 Larp.
If I can just cut in, if anybody has any questions regarding high resolution, 360 or meta techniques, please raise your hand. So, and we'll force it to explain.
Don't be afraid to ask. There are a lot of people here who can get really good explanations.
Actually, can you define high resolution?
High resolution, yes. I will give my explanation and then someone can say, no, I don't agree, and then you will get another one. I would explain high resolution as being a play where the small things matter. Like you don't have to do the biggest gestures or be really loud or really clear. A lot of things can be said in the subtext by just positioning yourself, but just giving a glance. All the small things can tell a lot of story in a high resolution Larp. So it's more of a way to, not like a design choice, more a way to describe what type of play you want. Do you agree? Okay. There was a core storyline, I will just be very brief about it, which was about the death of the last elder in the village. The Larp started with a goodbye, and the entire game was about the rites around the funeral of this dead person that was very loved and important to the village. We sold this game to people as a low fantasy Larp, but the truth was that there were some extremely epic high fantasy features in it. And this was because we wanted to create a contrast and a sense of myth around this setting, because it was a saga. It was not a cool fantasy novel, it was a saga, and we wanted it to feel earthly and grounded and human, but we also wanted the mythical and the fantastical element of saga storytelling. And these are some concepts for clothes and characters before the game. And the supernatural part of it basically was that the regular people of the village, they lived a double lifespan compared to anyone else, which means that they turned maybe 140, 150 years old before dying. We had immortal characters that sometimes visited the village, but mainly were present in the form of storytelling and myths, and these were like godlike characters, except that the gods also walked the earth, but they had different abilities which were superhuman, and different characteristics that were very clear, very much like old gods. And there were also strangers who entered the village, which came from a sort of Game of Thrones style fantasy setting. Apart from the physical setting, which was just a regular fantasy village, we also used a lot of what I call in-context effects, which means that it's not special effects that we rely on in order to give information to the players, but we use them to enhance stuff that they already know. For example, we had these two guys, which played twin brothers and were immortal. Yeah, like I said, it's a low fantasy LARP, except that we had guys who like turn things on fire by their thoughts, except for that it's low fantasy. And then everyone knew this, and everyone would play on this idea that these guys could turn people and stuff on fire, whether or not it actually happened. But when it did happen, something sort of crossed the bridge over what am I trying to imagine and what am I actually seeing. And we did this to sort of fuck around with players a little bit. Like this guy could control his power of fire, so he always also off-game had control over the fire. He actually could trigger the pyrotech mechanisms, and he knew, okay, now things are blazing. But this guy had this problem that he couldn't control it, but it was really emotional, so whenever he felt very strongly, whether it was positive or negative, he knew that there was always a risk that something would go up in flames. So we were fucking around with him, like rigging small objects. And which is really gorgeous. We also had magic weather. It happens sometimes. I don't know who was on my side, which god, but we had really magic weather. And I think anyone who's been on an outdoors LARP when you can't control the environment, knows, like you said, the weather gives a tremendous effect on how the LARP is played, the general atmosphere. I am thanking God that this LARP was not sunny and pretty. It was misty, it was rainy, it was autumn and it was cold. It was late September and people had to wear their thick woolly clothes. They had to huddle inside of the houses, and there was rain and there was mist, and all of this helped to convey this feeling of that this is a dangerous world that we live in, and we better huddle up together to keep warm and to keep safe in this place. But that part was just luck or magic, I don't know. Then we had the outsiders, the thieves. And while we encouraged the villagers to wear like very low fantasy style clothes, which were very naturally colored, I encouraged them to wear really bright colored, extravagant, flamboyant style. They were all broken people who had made bad choices, and we wanted this to show in the kind of outfits that they had. And this was a very typical image of how the villagers look. You see, they almost sort of melting into the background of the houses. We also told the villagers that they were not allowed, the players were not allowed to wear any kind of clear visible metal. No silver, no gold, nothing shiny. We wanted them to be very, very plain and very soft colored. And the immortals, they were very much individual. They looked different depending on the type of god or characteristics they represented. The game area, which I think was most significant to hear, is when you work with outdoor areas and you do fantasy LARPs that's in the forest, it's very easy that the game gets extremely spread out. And that's not very good if you want a tight, high-resolution chamber LARP, because you risk ending up looking for people for half of the LARP. Or it ends up being very big scenes where people spread out. So we limited there was a huge play area, so we could have used the entire forest, but we limited it to the village, and we put the ring of torches, and we did an off-game rule that you as players have a responsibility to stay within this ring. You're not supposed to play yourself out of the ring. So that was just an off-game rule. It wasn't just that we told them in-game, this is dangerous, but we actually said you're not allowed. There were a few characters that had the ability to move inside and outside of the ring, but that was for storytelling purposes. It was in order to make everything make sense and in order to give them more possibilities, but that was also done in the meta locations rather than going out in the forest. So we kept all the players tightly, and the weather kept them in their houses. But what about the darkness then? Because we have this malevolent force in the forest, how are we going to do this? Should we build a monster? Like a monster suit and have a guy run around in the forest and be a monster? How should we depict the greatest fear of these villages and not only give the players a rule not to go outside the forest, but give the story a rule why you wouldn't even think about stepping outside of the torch ring? We tried a lot of different approaches, but we ended up that we couldn't come up with anything that could possibly be scarier than the imaginations of the players. So we settled for imagination, and we settled for sound. I don't have any sound samples with me, unfortunately, and they would not do justice on that little computer, because what we used were double-lating huge bass loudspeakers, which we conveniently placed against the wall of the Great Village Hall, where the villagers were supposed to take shelter when the darkness came. We were not very confident that this would work. We was like, oh, it's probably going to be pretty weak. But when we tested it, the whole house literally shaking, because it became like a resonance box. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. So we placed these two loudspeakers and a few more high loudspeakers out in the forest. This was secret. None of the players knew about it. They only knew that they were scared of the darkness, and we explained that the forest is malevolent, so that the sound of the wind, a bird singing, everything was just there to tempt you to step outside of the ring, so they could sort of interpret whatever was happening in nature as malevolent and as evil and as wanting me harm. So in the middle of the night, when the torch ring conveniently just went out, the people who had the night watch, because they had night watch, they were in watch couples, so they had the watch all through night. They sounded the alarm. The villagers had to run to shelter in the house, and we turned on the sound. This was the same also in context effect. They would have been like afraid regardless, because they had trained this in the workshop, they knew about it. They were already scared of the darkness because we had all this storyline, we had the off-game rules and so on. But I think that it was Anna-Karin who said that at first I was like, okay, there's sound, that's cool. But when the bass started and the house was literally shaking, they were like, oh my god, how the fuck did they do this? So then the players stopped asking questions, then they stopped analyzing how did the organizers do this, but were more like, okay, this is cool. So that was their imagination that they worked, and the players, they told me they had all kinds of sort of images of what this darkness looked like and what it felt like and how they imagined it, and they were all so much scarier than anything that we could possibly have managed to create with using props or suits or whatnot. So it was a fantasy outdoor chamber larp with a very strong storytelling focus and effects support that enhanced the story rather than creating it. By limiting the play area, the play became very intense, and in the cold September also kept the players indoors. And we got the really strong contrast between these villagers and the outsiders, which played up the culture. So I guess the honest larp pitch of this would be a low fantasy larp with in a super high epic fantasy setting. So that was the secret.
Christoph?
Yeah.
And as you might have noticed, we're now passing 11 o'clock. So if anybody of you need to be somewhere else, you are very welcome to run on.
I will try to do it rather quick. I'm going to talk about a game called Delirium. Delirium was organized by me and 5 other people, one of them being Jesper down there. So if you have any questions afterwards, you can ask me or Jesper. I will focus on the spatial game design and not on the rest of the game. The game was about romantic relations at a mental institution, and it was a very abstract game. We wanted to fabricate madness to give the players a feeling of being mad instead of asking them to play mad, because we think that players playing mad are not good to play with. It's very difficult to play with people if they're in their own world. So we wanted to use the surroundings of the game to fabricate madness so they could just focus on playing, and we would turn them mad instead of them playing mad. The other thing we wanted to use were theater techniques to do this, both because we thought it would be a good idea to fabricate it with light and sound and so on, but also because we thought the aesthetics were cool and it would be fun to try. Delirium was played in a big hall. in Whiteboard, it was 40 times 25 meters, and there was a stage that was 12 by 12 meters. We could make this hall completely dark, which means that this was technically a big black box. So we had a black box 25 by 40 meters. So what we wanted to do was to create a feeling of non-chronological time frame. So we wanted to be able to jump around in space and time, so that the players didn't have a feeling of everything just being one long story, but glimpses of experiences. So we made 7 islands of light. And in these islands of light, there were different scenography that was very simple, but represented different rooms in the institution. We had 36 participants, and there were 1 or 2, maybe 3 of these islands open at the same time that they could play. We had the janitor's place, we had a garden, we had the nurse's place, we had a playroom, we had the dinner room, we had the psychologist, and we had the sleeping area. Around these islands of light, there were darkness. And whenever a player wanted to, either the player or the characters, to slip into madness, they could slowly walk away from the island of light and into darkness. And they were able to stand outside in the dark and not being played with or upon by someone else, but being able to see what happened and not being in the scene. So they could experience the scenes from an outside perspective. And we call that delirium, that they went into their delirium. They could also leave the place. We had an off-game room out here. But the players slept in here and they ate in here. They were in that dark area for 52 hours. The 52 hours of game was organized. We had everything organized down to 15-minute schedule. We had a very long wall in the organizer's room where every scene was organized beforehand. And during the game, we had an organizer table up here where we could control all the lights, all the sounds, everything, a big projector that had a big clock on the wall up here that showed in which room they had to be in. Then we had a runtime game master on the floor that were walking around and seeing what happened and could talk via a walkie-talkie to the organizers sitting controlling everything. One of the organizers sitting up here described this as being a reality DJ, that you can sit and pull the levers and twitch the knobs and see what happened out here. And then we had the headquarters and the kitchen out here. And there were also organizers out here. I think we were 15 people running the game for 36 participants. So a lot of organizers. And then we had the ninjas. The ninjas were people that could, when there was darkness, for instance, if this was turned down, they could walk in here while the players were somewhere else. And if the players had left a mess, they could clean it up. So the next time they were able to play here, we turned off the light. It was clean. Or if they left it clean, we can turn everything around. For instance, there was a big fight over here. Someone smashed the table and a lot of glasses. Next time they went there, it was gone. Like it never happened. Or it happened out in the future or somewhere else. Because what we could do was that we could jump around in time by turning these up and down. One morning we started out making a scene here where they had their dinner. So they started the day with dinner. Then they had a scene, a bingo scene, playing bingo up here with the same numbers as yesterday, repeating something they have tried 3 times before. Then they had a scene down here that they tried before, and then they went up here and they cleaned up after a party. We made a mess up here while they were down here. They cleaned up after a party that they 3 hours later would plan. So we turned everything upside down. What we also did was that we recorded the sounds of specific scenes and we played it again later. So, for instance, there was a meeting for the new people 3 times during the game. That was a repetition of the same scene. And we recorded that scene the first time, and the second time and the third time we played that sound in the back. So they felt like the 2 positions in time were at the same point. At some point, someone was standing in an island of light, yelling out in the darkness, "Are there someone there?" And the sound guy, who was very brilliant, he ran down there and recorded it and ran back up again, and he put it in there and he blasted it out back to the person standing and yelling, "Are there someone out there? Are there someone out there?" Okay. We also use lights to tell the players what kind of mode they were in. We played before the revolution and after the revolution, and we had white light and we had red light. We didn't play the revolution, but everyone knew that with white light there were strict rules, and with red light they had to define the rules themselves. So all the scenes could be in white or red light, and we could control it like we wanted to. Every time we turned down the lights and were ready to cut a scene like a game master would do at a tabletop game, we played a sound, and at some point the players started to recognize the sound and knew that from now on I have 20 seconds until this scene is ending, and either respond by being frustrated and trying to get everything done in 20 seconds, or just knowing that things will start over again. I am mad. This will happen again. And I played that sound at another conference, and there was one of the players there, and she hadn't heard it for 3 years. And that sound just kicked all the emotions from the game into her mind. And I think we're underestimating how powerful sounds are. So use sounds. But beware, with caution, that they are very powerful. Yes.
How many loudspeakers were there? I
We had
felt like it was sound all over the place.
We had loudspeakers out here.
It was a concert hall. There were loads of loudspeakers.
And we had loudspeakers here. We had lights out here in the corners, creating these islands, and we put up
Platform.
in the ceiling. There were like 20 meters to the ceiling. We put up a lot of lights that we could control down here. And this was it's called a stage tower. It was 25 meters as well, and we can control everything in there. I'll talk a bit more. Okay. One thing that we did as well, we're using props to create a feeling of being mad. We told the players that everything that was red in the game was an object, a meta technique that they could use to play on their madness. All the objects that were red had a fault in some way. Something was wrong with them. For instance, you could get a red spoon with holes in it. So everyone else was sitting eating their soup normally, and with the red spoon with holes in it, I am experiencing, as the player holding it, that there are holes in this spoon. That's why I cannot eat. For everyone else, the staff and the other characters, this was a normal spoon, and you were the one not being able to eat with it. So, for instance, you were given a pill this size, a red pill. Everyone else were given normal pills. And people were looking at you saying, "Just swallow the pill." And you were sitting with the pill thinking, "I cannot swallow this pill."